Welcome to this chapter on the rebuilding of the 62TE transmission. This chapter is divided into three parts: teardown, subassemblies, and reassembly. In this part, you'll learn about the reassembly of this unit. My name is Bill Brayton, and I'll be your host for this chapter. It's a great day to fix transmissions, so let's get started. This will be part one of a three-part series on reassembly of this unit. Okay, before we start the assembly process, we need to make a couple of checks. The first thing we are checking is going to be remote pinion turning torque. There are factory tools to check turning torque, and we are going to use some common items that we may have around the shop. If we don't have these items, we know that they are at the local parts store. For the pinion, we are going to use an 1 1/8" emergency freeze plug. Now, place the plug into the gear and expand the plug. Lightly lube the bearings with ATF and install the gear into the case. Next, install a pinion cover onto the gear and install the bolts. Next, torque the cover bolts to 140 inch-pounds. Now use a dial-type inch-pound torque wrench to measure pinion gear turning torque. Turning torque for the remote pinion gear should be 2 to 8 inch-pounds of drag. If there is more than 8 inch-pounds of drag, decrease the shim size under the remote pinion bearing cover cup. If turning torque is less than 2 inch-pounds of drag, increase the shim size under the remote pinion bearing cover cup. Okay, now that the remote pinion has been checked and set, remove the assembly and set it aside. Next, turn the case so the differential housing is facing up. Now install the oil baffle and the small bearing race into the case as shown. Now, with the bearing and oil baffle in the case, carefully install the differential into the bearing race. Next, we can install the large bearing race and the adjustment shim into the case. Okay. So now we can temporarily install the differential cover. Right now, sealer is not needed. After the cover is on the case, install 10 cover to case bolts and torque them to 45 inch-pounds. Now we're going to use an 1 3/8" temporary expansion plug as a special tool. Install the plug into the differential and tighten the nut until the plug is secured. Okay, let's install the differential bearing cover now. Remember, this is a temporary install, so we're not using sealer at this time. Now torque the cover bolts to 105 inch-pounds. Now use an inch-pound dial-type torque wrench to check the differential turning torque. It should be between 10 and 22 inch-pounds of drag. If turning torque is more than 22 inch-pounds of drag, decrease shim size behind the end cover and recheck. If turning torque is less than 10 inch-pounds of drag, increase the shim size. After proper turning torque is achieved for the differential, remove the differential from the case and set it aside. Be sure to keep the correct shim with the differential. Now turn the case over so the bell housing is facing up. Next, use a new gasket, a new low reverse retainer, and new bolts and install the retainer into the case. Torque the bolts to 45 inch-pounds. Note here that if you are having trouble lining up the gasket, use a small amount of assembly gel to stick the gasket to the retainer before you put it in the case. Next, use a new molded piston and lube the seals prior to installation. Be sure to line up the tab and the speed sensor cutout when installing the piston. Now place the low reverse piston return spring onto the piston. Use a suitable press to compress the spring and install the snap ring. There is a factory tool for this that can be used, or a tool can be made from parts around the shop, or a foot press can be used as well. Here we see the tool installed and tightened down so the snap ring can be installed. Be sure the opening of the snap ring is in an opening between the spring fingers. Before we install the planet and bolt on the gear in the back, we're going to check and adjust low reverse and 2/4 clutch pack clearance. First, let's identify the difference between the low reverse clutch pack and the 2/4 clutch pack. It's really simple. The L and R clutches and steels are thinner than the 2/4 clutches and steels. Now install the low reverse clutches and steels and leave the last clutch out. Next, install the flat snap ring in the lower groove in the case with the opening between the 2 and 3 o'clock position. Okay, now we can install the last low reverse friction plate and the pressure plate. Be sure the beveled side of the pressure plate faces up. Next, install the tapered snap ring with the flat side down and the opening between the 9 and 10 o'clock position. Tap the snap ring in various spots to seat it in the case. Now use a feeler gauge to measure low reverse clutch clearance. Clearance needs to be 35 to 58 thousandths and is adjusted by changing the pressure plate. Now, after the low and reverse clearance has been checked and adjusted, install the 2/4 clutches and steels. Start with the friction plate and finish with the steel plate on top. Next, install a new molded piston into the 2/4 piston housing. Be sure to line up a slot in the piston with the tab on the housing. Now install the return spring and line up the tab on the spring with the slot in the case as shown. Install the housing into the case. Okay, we have the housing in and we need to compress the housing to install the snap ring into the groove. Now the common method is to install the snap ring into the case and use a hammer and screwdriver to smartly tap the snap ring into the groove. Next, use a feeler gauge to measure 2/4 clutch clearance. Clearance should be 30 to 104 thousandths and is non-adjustable. If the clearance is not within spec, recheck 2/4 clutch pack assembly. This will conclude the part 1 of the 62TE reassembly. We want to thank you for participating in our virtual training solutions powered by ATRA. Until next time, let's keep fixing transmissions together.